Recording in progress.
Hi everyone. Hi. Happy to see you here. Awesome. So we will go ahead and start today's session. Okay. Once again, thank you so much for joining. We are very happy that you attend the sessions so we can interact with you guys directly, right? And solve a machine that hopefully will help you with your methodology. Okay. So today, we will work with a PG practice machine called Robust. Okay. And for anyone that might be joining for the first time to one of my sessions, my name is Edwin. I am a student mentor here at OffSec, and I'm very happy to be here with you. Now, let me turn off my camera so all that you see is the presentation and the machine itself, right? So before we start, I want to do a quick set of expectations of what we want to achieve with hack track sessions, okay? Because I want to make an important disclaimer that these machines that we have selected, they have been selected because of the methodology and the techniques that they teach. I have seen on the chat that some of you attempted to solve it on your own, and some of you said that only foothold was achieved, right? So we will now see what you might have missed on the privilege escalation. But I want to also mention that we are not the creators of the OSCP machines, okay? And these machines that we are showcasing do not predict or disclose anything about the exam. Okay. Now, these recommendations that we are doing are just based on our experience and the learning value that we find on each of these labs. Also, the goal of HackTrack is not for us to memorize commands. Okay. And we don't want to build a copy paste formula, basically. What we want you guys to achieve is to build a repeatable methodology, okay? To see how you can enumerate the target, how you can identify possible attack vectors, and also identify which ones are worth pursuing, right? So as we go, we will also see how important it is for us to take notes, okay? And another crucial skill for us to have is knowing when to move on from a vector that is not getting us anywhere. Okay. Now, before we start the machine, I want to show you guys before going over robust. I want to take a few minutes to show you something that I wish more learners used, because on Discord, I regularly see questions like, hey, I am done with the course material, or hey, I am done with the challenge labs. So what else, or what should I practice next, right? So a common recommendation that we get is, for example, PG practice. And yeah, it's good. It's a very great resource. As a matter of fact, it's what we will use today, right? Now, even though it is good, right? We have more options, okay? So if you have access with your subscription, I will also like you to take advantages of many other labs that you have access to. For example, if you go to labs and you see the offset cyber range, specifically on the offensive cyber range, okay, there is a collection that I really love, because what best option can we have for someone that is preparing for the OSCP exam than actual retired exam environments, right? So you should really take advantage of this resource if you have access, okay? And I want to also mention, like, sometimes we might see some CVEs on the internet that we might read about, and we might find it interesting, right? So you can search for those on the portal as well. For example, a few days ago, I was working with this one before it got released to production. And I want to reinforce that while you might read the advisory and you might find details on what the vulnerability is about, right? But it's going over the labs that will actually build you the skills, right? So also, if you guys are into defensive content, because I, for example, I love defensive content. I have the OSDA and the OSTH certifications. So I really enjoy those. And you can also find some content for it, like the defensive cyber range. If you ask me for a recommendation, you can go with this one, the DWP2 shell. This is the last one I was working on a few days ago. And just the last one, it's just that so many options, right? But just the last one that I want to show you, if you guys are not familiar with our grimoires here on grimoires, so these ones are pretty much a detective style challenge, okay, where you need to determine what happened, how it happened, and which evidence supports your conclusion, okay. A recommendation I can give you guys is to go with this one, with metal, okay. So I just wanted to showcase this for you first, because these resources, to me, they helped me so much when I was after my certifications. So I thought I'd share this tip as well. Okay. So now let's get to the machine that I want to work with, which is robust. Okay. And just let me confirm I am connected to the VPN. Nice. So let me start the machine. And what can we do first once we get access to this host? Okay. So today we are just working, or we just have a target in scope, right? So one of the things that we can do as soon as we have access to the lab is go for a full TCP scan. We can do that fairly earlier, right? Because again, we are dealing with one host only. I will discuss in a bit how our methodology might change based on how many machines we might be targeting. Okay. So right now, I want to run a quick reachability check and see how this host performs. If you could please confirm in the chat if the font size is good, that would be great. So what I will do now is I will do a quick ping, okay? And for the IP address 168 to 12 200, right? This is the one that I have. Yeah. So let it run for a couple of seconds. Okay. So I don't really see anything going on here. So let me cancel it. Okay. So we didn't receive an ICMP reply, right? But this is something I want to emphasize because I constantly see it, and I think it's a good tip for you guys to have. This does not mean that the host is down. Okay. What this means is that we did not receive a reply to our request or ICMP request, right? So what I want to now perform is, as I said, I can go deep on the ports because it's a single host. So I can perform an mmap scan. Okay. I will disable or I will use the PN flag so mmap scans the target without waiting for a successful discovery response, right? So as I said, since we have only one host, I can go straight to scan all open ports. And I will also use the reason flag because I want mmap to tell me why it is determining or why it's labeling a port the way it does. Okay. So now the IP address to 12,200. Yep. Okay, good. Now, while this scan runs, okay, I want to briefly talk about how this approach changes when the scope contains more than one machine. Quick question for you guys. Is there any difference in your methodology when you are facing a small network? Let's say that you're facing the exam right now. That will be 6 machines, right? Would you approach it the exact same way as if you were working on a large network with around 500 machines, for example? Would you do that? Yeah, exactly. So the methodology should change a bit, right? So we still have the main goal, which is that we want to understand enough of the environment to choose our next move in a smart way because we do not want to be losing time. Now, with only a few hosts, like here that we have one, we can enumerate since the start deeply, right? Like I'm doing here. Now, if I had hundreds of hosts on the other hand, then we will normally start, as I see that some of you are mentioning on the chat, we will normally start with a quick discovery because I would like to get a sense of what is there. And I want to identify those systems and those attack paths that look the most relevant for my objective, right? Then once we have identified it, then we could focus on deeper enumeration, but this time not on all hosts. We will go with the ones that make the most sense, right? So the scan is now done. Let me add this to my notes. Okay. So let's quickly review this one. Now, at first glance, what can we infer from these results? So we see that the host is indeed reachable over TCP, right? Even though our pin requests seem to fail, but it is reachable. Now we can see port 22, we can see port 80, and a not so common port 7680. Now, while Nmap's service labels over here, they are useful as a starting point. At least for me, I find them useful. So I will still like, however, to get at least the specific version to confirm them. Okay. So now that we know which ports are open, I want to run a more detailed scan against only these 3 ports. Okay. So what I can do now is once again execute sudo nmap, but I will use the A flag and I will explain in a bit like the A flag, what does it do? So it enables many features on nmap, right? For example, version detection, default scripts, and it might even try to identify the operating system, right? So I will use this scan on port 22, port 80, port 7680, and the IP address 200. And once again, I want to Emma tell me why it shows each assigned port state, right? So let me quickly give it a few seconds while it runs. This should not take as long as the other one did because this one we are just going for 3 ports, right? Let's give it a quick check. 66%, so should be done rather quickly. Okay. Let me take a quick look in the chat while I wait for the scan to finish. Yeah, I do see that you guys have the right idea. Great. So we have Kay mentioning that A is those combines, that the ones that we were mentioning. That's good. So the scan is almost done. Perfect. So let's see. Let's see. I want to first add it to my notes before I start reviewing it. Okay. So I have it here. This way I don't have to scan later on once again if I lose this output, right? So what do we get now? We get on the version of port 22 OpenSSH for Windows 8.1. Okay, good. We have a PHP CLI server on port 80. Good. Now, for port 7680, I think that it still remains undefined, right? Because it doesn't tell me much more than what I already knew, I will say, right? But, quick question for you. What other important detail would you guys or would you in the chat say that we can infer from these mmap results? Can anyone tell me? So while you take a closer look, look at the TTL value of 125, right? So how can we interpret a TTL value? Now, for we will often see that for Linux and Unix, the value of the TTL will start near 64. Now, for Windows, the TTL value will start at around 128. And there may be some network devices in which the TTL value might start around 255 or 256. So, what do we have here? Both details of having OpenSSH for Windows, right? And the TTL value already makes me formulate a strong hypothesis that this is a Windows machine, right? So now another question for you guys. Are we done with scanning? Should we start now focusing on these ports that we have identified here? Exactly, exactly. As many of you say, like Ali, um, we have not yet gone for a UDP scan, right? Let's not forget about those ports, okay? So an open TCP port, if it's open, of course, it will respond most likely. Now, if it's closed, then the connection will most likely get rejected. However, what happens with UDP ports? This protocol does not have a like a handshake or a connection establishment handshake. So we can send a packet directly and we may receive no response even though the port might be open. Okay. So that missing reply of sending a packet and not getting anything back could mean many things. It could mean like there may be no service. It could be the firewall may have dropped the packet, or if a service is or a port is open, it may have simply ignored the request. Could be because it didn't understand it somehow, right? So a UDP scan, again, it's with a UDP scan with no replies at all. It just tells us that none of our test packets received the answer, but it doesn't necessarily confirm that there are no ports open or there is no service running on them. Okay, so how will you enumerate or how would you perform the UDP scan? So while Nmap, we could continue with Nmap, right? It's an option, but for this session, I want to introduce you to a tool called UDPX. Okay, so UDPX, it's let me zoom in a bit. Okay, so UDPX, what it does is that it sends a protocol a specific packet to the defined service and waits for a response. Okay, so let's go ahead and execute this scan. I have it installed, UDPX, and our target 200. Okay, so the reason why I'm using this is because it will send those packets that it will make it look like it's regular or the type of traffic that the protocol is expecting. Okay, so if the target responds to one of these probes or one of these tests that we are doing, then we will have a lead to investigate. Now, if nothing responds back, which actually seems to be the case here, nothing, right? So I can add this to my notes and I will just have this on the record that I didn't get any responses. But again, this does not prove that no service is present, right? Now, now that we have completed both TCP and UDP discovery, okay, where should we start and why? Because let's keep in mind that we might be time constrained here. Imagine if this was one of the exam machines. You will not like to waste a lot of time, right? So let's comment a bit on each of the ports. For example, for the port 22, so we have identified the service, but the probability of finding a public available exploit for such a protocol, especially modern versions, I will not believe it's that high. I will not believe it's that likely. Okay. Now, we don't even have usernames, we don't have passwords. And if we go right now for a brute force with just a generic list, then I don't think we might get something in our current stance. Okay, we might even lock out some accounts depending on the policy that this host might have, right? So I will just have it here on the notes as a potential access path, and we can return to it if at some point we find credentials or at least usernames that we could brute force with, right? Now, port 80. I already see in the chat that a lot of you have said, hey, go with port 80, right? So with port 80, specifically web applications, they can expose a huge attack surface, especially if they are custom built, right? So I will indeed treat this service as my highest priority, okay? And even if we didn't find a exploit vector here, a web application could even reveal usernames that we could then try against the SSH service, right? So this will be my highest priority. And now for port 7680, I don't really have much info on this one. Like we could do a quick port, what is it? A quick scan. And it mentions that port 7680 is used by Windows Delivery Optimization, which is a built-in Microsoft service. Okay, so I mean, we could try to do some enumeration on it, right? But I'm still inclined on going first for port 80. And I also want to mention that just because the search and the port number say that this is what will be likely running on it, the port number alone does not identify a service. Okay, so we should treat this as a hypothesis, and we could at some point, as I said, do some basic enumeration, but for now I will have it as my lowest priority. Okay, so the port 80, let's move on to it. First, I will use Burp Suite to interact with the service. Okay, and the first thing that I want to do is I want to add the service to Burp's target scope. And how can I do this? I can come to target scope, and I want to add the HTTP service and the IP address, right? 200. Now, why am I doing this? This tells Burp which URLs belong to the application that we are testing and which traffic is out of scope. And I like to do this because I want to keep the unrelated browser traffic out of the HTTP history, because that will make the history itself easier to review. Okay, and I will be able to spot the application related traffic a lot faster. Okay, so now when I click on OK, and when Burp asks me if I want to keep out of scope traffic from the history, I will say yes. Okay, yeah, so I will say yes. Now I want to use Burp's built-in browser. Okay, open browser, and I want to now browse to the service. So let's go to HTTP 168.200. Okay, so let's give it a couple of seconds while it loads. Okay. Okay, let's see what we have now. So I have this message: your IP is not allowed to use this web service. Only 10.10.10.x, meaning this range, is allowed. So I don't want to rely only on what the browser is rendering. I want to actually see what the or reconstruct the traffic. Okay. So let me go to history, and now I see that the first request, when it went to the root path, okay, it got redirected. I got a 302. Okay, so the 302 indicates the redirect, and I also see a interesting header, location login .php. So because I might not be familiar with this header, I want to do a quick search on location header, and let's see if we can familiarize ourselves. So the documentation says the HTTP location header indicates the URL to redirect a page to. Okay, so based on this info, I'm trying, or I've been redirected to login, but because my traffic does not come from this range, I'm getting blocked, apparently, right? So now when we see login, that's the request that generated the denial, right? So here is what I want to emphasize for you, that if we had looked only at what the page render, okay, or what the browser renders, we only see the final denial message. So we will have missed on the detail that we got redirected to it, and there is a location header that we should pay close attention to, right? So this denial message, it gives us a lead, right? But before I focus entirely on this denial, because I don't want to just start performing enumeration and enumeration on this and ignore everything else. Okay. I want to also quickly check whether the server also exposes any other useful content. Okay. So first, what I want to do is I want to replicate the traffic that I saw in burp. I want to reproduce that denial on the terminal for me to, I find it a bit easier to interact with. So what I will do is I will use curl, and let me put this terminal here so you can see it better. Okay. So now I want to request the 192, 168, 212, 200 login.php. Okay. Now I see the denial, right? So this matches with what we saw in burp. And we also notice, which I will add to my notes, that PHP is in play, right? This should have also be seen here. Yeah. So PHP is in play. Let me add this. Okay. Now the response itself, it just has the denial message, and it doesn't return like any links or any forms, scripts, comments, or any other client side resources that we could crawl or that we could follow, right? So now I want to do a quick check. I want to see how the application behaves when I request a resource that I know that will not exist. Like this does not exist, hack track test. I get redirected as well, right? 302 found. So I can follow this redirection with dash L and I get the same response. But notice what I find interesting about this is that even though I get the denial message, I'm always getting a 200 response, right? So why is that important? Because we are getting denied with a 200 status code that we might most of the time associate with successful responses. But here we see that 200 OK does not necessarily mean that a requested resource exists. So if you see in your brute forcing tools, instead of 404 of not found, you might also see 200, right? So when we find these scenarios, we cannot trust the status code alone. We must also compare details like response size. And if necessary, and if time allows, then we can examine the response body manually, right? So I want to discover if there are any directories or files that have not been linked. For that, I will use Ferox Buster, and I will give it the URL. Have you used this one? I will assume that a lot of you have, right? So 200, and the word list that I want to use this time is from the seclist project on web content. And on this terminal, I want to start fuzzing for directories, okay? Now, will not open. I think I'm missing, oh, I'm missing the extension. Okay, so while that one runs, I want to also search for files. Okay, I will also use Ferox Buster, and this time what I will change is, of course, the word list, right? So the URL is still the same. The word list, however, while still from the same project, this time I want to go for files. Nice. So as I mentioned, we're trying to find resources that have not been linked on the site that we have inspected yet, right? So as this scan runs, let's see, take a quick glance on the results. Okay, so this looks interesting for me. DS store, and why it looks interesting because it returns the 200 value. As I said, this doesn't mean that it exists, right? We might be getting the denial message. but it returns a 200, and the size, especially the fact that it has this amount of bytes, which is substantially different than this one, for example, on IP, right? So if I go to IP, I see the denial message, right? But this one is very different. So I would like to uh, dig a bit more onto what this is. So I can download it. Let me leave these scans running here in the background, and I will now use wget, and I will try to get that file. Let me see, hack track. Okay. So let me try wget http 192.168.212.200, yeah, ts store. Okay, so we have it here, right? Or we don't. What? Oh, it's a hidden file. Sorry, sorry. Okay, so we have it here. Nice. So if I try to see like the contents of it, we will see that it's actually binary content. So our terminal does not does not print it or does not show it correctly, right? But what we can do instead, we can use one of the OS utilities. We can use file on this discovery, and we see that it is an Apple Desktop Services store. Are you familiar with this type of files? So at this point, what I want to do is do a quick search on what this actually is, and I'll search it on Google and see. So it says that this file is a hidden file created automatically by macOS to store custom folder view settings. Okay. What else do we have? Custom attributes containing folders such as, and it's a file that stores custom attributes of its containing folder. Custom attributes of its containing folder. Okay, so what can we infer from what we have just read? So if it has custom attributes of a containing folder, then if one of these attributes, or if this file is deployed by accident to a web server, as we see that looks like the case here, then it may reveal on its attributes, it may reveal names or files or directories that we will never find maybe on a word list or on a generic word list, right? So I would like to parse it. I would like to see if I can actually get something from it, right? So I want to see how can I do it. So I will search for parse ts store file Linux. Okay, let's take a quick look at what we have here. I see that OK Productivity on the chat asks, but why will this be in a Windows target? That's a great question. That's a great question. Most likely got deployed by accident. I don't know how it got here, but that's a very great question. So this one, for some reason, is not loading. Let's see. Um, I would like to take a closer look, like on GitHub related links. So let's search for store parser GitHub. Did it this load at some point? No, it didn't. Okay. So I see this tool. Let's take a quick glance at what it does to list all the files and their properties. It's the file every macOS developer knows. Okay. Okay. So let's take a look at the second. And here we see the usage. I think this is a good candidate, this tool, for us to try to parse the file. So I will clone this repository. So I will do a git clone. Okay. And let's see, we do get the main, that it's the usage, it's what the usage shows. Good. So let's try, let's see, Python, the project, main, and the file, right? Look, okay. So we get classes, DB includes vendor. So I want to add this to my notes that I got this potential, right? We have not confirmed yet what if even if these get a hit, but a potential entry, right? Some candidates. So let's test them because the number is quite low. We can test them all at once. Like let's do curl now. Let's just start with classes. Not found. Okay. Let me see if there's another, perhaps another leaked file here. Not found either. So let me see for, oh, I almost lose the viewpoint. So let's see with DB, not found. And let me get again from the notes, DB includes and vendor. Let's try for includes, not found. And let's go with vendor. So not found either, right? Now, this request did not reveal any useful path past the denial or the 404, right? So now, even though we have not made progress with this one, it still teaches us, like, if you notice the IP based denial, I mean, we are getting a 404, but we are not getting the denial message that we got here, right? So what this tells me is that the IP based denial is not being applied to every resource on the web server in the same way, right? So the application does seem to have it here at some point, like with PHP files, but it's not consistent, right? So at this point, we could continue. Like, let's take a look at the scans. They're over. So directories, not much, and medium files, neither, right? I just want to. I think I didn't add this to my notes, so I will add it now, just so I know where I got that file from. So now I want to go back to this. Okay. So it says only this range is allowed, but it doesn't tell us explicitly where the application is obtaining or IP address. It doesn't tell us, like, hey, this is what I'm detecting from you, and that's why you are not authorized, right? So, do you have an idea of how a web application could decide which IP address a request came from? Like, what information could it use? So, I see on the chat that Sorin, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is mentioning on a header. Thomas is also mentioning X forwarded for header. Okay, good. So, at a network level, a server could observe the source address of the system directly connected to it, right? But for applications, they might be placed behind an intermediary. Like what? For example, a reverse proxy or a load balancer. So if they had that architecture, for example, if they had client and then they had reverse proxy, and then the PHP application that we are testing now. So the backend application might see the reverse proxy as a peer in the network, like the immediate peer, right? Instead of seeing the original client. So the proxy needs some mechanism to pass the original client address to the backend, right? So let's search on Google How does a web application get the original client IP behind a reverse proxy, for example, right? So let's take a quick look here. This one, IP geolocation. Let's see. Let's see. These are on the slides as well, but I will send the link here on the chat for you to access it if you would like. But let's take a quick look on this source. And look, it mentions finding the client IP in X forwarded for. Okay, so let's see if there's any other, like, let's see this one. Retrieving client IP behind a reverse proxy. Taking a quick glance. Okay, so I see the X forwarded for being mentioned once more. Okay, so what actually is this X forwarded for? Let's quickly do a research. X forwarded for, and on the documentation, let's say, I'm getting it in Spanish, sorry about that. Okay, so for the X forwarded for is a request header, a de facto standard header for identifying the originating IP address of a client connecting to a web server through a proxy server. So, what hypothesis or what idea can I get from what we have just researched? Perhaps, and only perhaps, we have not confirmed it. Perhaps this application uses this header when making its access decisions, right? And will the application allow us, because if we intercept it, Timber, will it allow us to provide the value ourselves? So how could we bypass this? So let me do another research. I want to search for X forwarded for IP restriction bypass. Okay, let's see. Let's see this one on GitHub. Brute force protection bypass. See this one. Okay. A POC. Okay, look, it says attempt login X forwarded for, and it gives us how it will look like. Change the header to, okay. Okay, good. So based on what I have identified, I would like to return to BERT and take this request that got me the denial message, send it to repeater. I will name it baseline because I want to have a starting point. Baseline login.php request. Let's send it. Okay. Now I will duplicate it and I want to name it X forwarded for test. Okay. So now what can we do? So keeping this test stuff, I want to do a quick test and check if simply adding the header X forwarded for with a random IP address like 5050, let's see the response, we still get denied, right? So let's use the address that we are explicitly told, or at least the range, right? So let me change this one to 10, 10, 10, 10. Send. Look, look how much it changed, right? How much the response changed. And now we get a login page, right? So we have bypassed the restriction. So this again demonstrates that the application, right? The application's IP-based access decision can be influenced through the X forwarded for header. Now, an address outside the range of what the error tells us, then that gets denied. But if we use that one, we of course bypass it, right? So we have confirmed the bypass manually, but this header, it changes only the request that I am using here, right? And I really wouldn't like to be adding this header manually in repeater every time. So how could we configure Burp Suite to add this header automatically instead of editing every request by hand? Do you have an idea? So I see he called in the chat mentions intercept, edit, forward. We can make Burp adds it auto. Okay, but how? I also see some other responses from Bart intruder, for example, but intruder will be for attempting to brute force, right? Like what we did. But because we don't know, what can we do? Research it, right? So let's do a search like Burp automatically add header to every request. Okay. So the first hit that I get, add a custom header, but this one is a extension, right? Um, I will before trying something like this, I would like to see if PortSwigger itself has any official documentation, okay, on how to do it. So what I can do now is add to my search official documentation. Okay, so I see some links here. Let's take a look at this one. So spoofing your IP address using bird proxy match and replace. So what does it say? So it tells us that to add a custom match, to add a custom match and replace rule, and we can go to proxy, match and replace, and then add a rule. Under type, make sure the request header is selected and leave the match field empty so Bird appends a new header to the request rather than replacing a new one. And it gives us an example, right? Great. So let's try what this guide is telling us. We can go to settings, then it said to proxy match and replace. So proxy, let's see, HTTP match and replace rules. Okay, great. So now I will select that it only apply to in-scope items, okay? Because due to the same reason I mentioned at the beginning, I want our searches or our rules, this in this case, to be limited to the target that we have in scope that we configured earlier, right? So now I will click on add and it says request header. So request header, it's already selected for us. And then we should, on the match field, we should leave it empty, this one, and we should replace it with what we want added to each request, right? So what do we want added? I want X forwarded for, so the header that helped me bypass the restriction, right? Right? So now I can test this, and we see that if it's missing from the request, it will be added, right? So I think that we are good now. So let's click OK. Let me confirm it's actually added. Yes, I do see it here. So let me close the settings and now let me reload in the browser. You see? You see? So I have bypassed this successfully, and I now don't have to use repeater every time and edit it manually. Good. So now our access context has changed because during our first directory content, the brute force that we did here, the application treated our request as if they were coming from our disallowed IP address, right? But now we know that if we add x forwarded for, right, x forwarded for, then we can bypass the initial restriction. Now, it's important to note that we have not authenticated in any way, right? We're still with the same source address on the network level, and we are only spoofing the header. So, quick question for you: why should we repeat the enumeration after bypassing this access control check? Or should we rely on the earlier results? Should we save time and base our ideas on what we already did? So I mentioned here, right, that the application, it treated the request as if it was coming from a disallowed IP address, but now I have another context. So I want to see how the web server treats me now with this new execution context. So I will use Ferox Buster once again. Okay. I will go with directories, but what do I need to add now? I need to add the header that bypasses the restriction. So I will use the H switch and I will state that X forwarded for is 10, 10, 10, 10, right? Is it good? So let's send it. Oh, once again, I am missing the extension. Sorry about that. So let's send it. And that's for directories. Let's see for files. Um, so let me take this one. Let me do directories. So use files, right? Okay, so now it's running, right? So while this scans runs, I don't want to stay just watching the progress bar, right? So while this scan runs, I can get rid of this one right now. So I want to manually inspect the login form that we now have access to, okay? So this page identifies itself as a robust employee manager. Now, I do not recognize this name as a known product, okay? So also the page does not expose an application version, really, right? If we recall, at some point we identify the PHP, but that's the PHP version, the runtime. It's not the web application version, right? So I can do a quick search, and let's do it just to show you. I can do a quick search using search exploit for the application name Robust Employee Manager, and no results, right? Immediately. So it search exploit did not find a matching entry. Now, this just means that it was not here, right? Not that it may not exist somewhere else. But based on what I see now, I don't want to spend more time searching for such public available exploits. What I do want to do now is test weak credential pairs, okay? So let's, for example, test admin, admin, okay? And we see that we don't get much, okay? Now, if we try administrator, administrator, we stay on the same page, right? And both attempts leaves us on the login page. Now, what do I actually get from these attempts? I now get a failed login baseline, invalid user or password. So we could then compare any later response in any test that we do and see if it does not contain this message, it might deserve a closer attention, right? So this message is also very generic because it doesn't tell us like, hey, the username is incorrect, or hey, the password is incorrect, or even if both are incorrect. So I want to do a quick test on SQL injection on this one. I will not spend too much time if I don't find anything promising, but let's see if we can bypass something here. So I want to search for a quick SQLi out bypass word list, still from the seclist project. Okay. And now what I want to do is I want to turn on burps proxy the intercept because I want to see how this is actually being sent. So let's say admin pass. Now the request is captured. We see it here. Now the important parts that I see is it is a post request, right? It's a post request. It has the host header. It has the header, the X forwarded for that we have used for the bypass, and the content type, which is URL encoded, right? So if I want to do a quick test, instead of rebuilding all of this manually with other tools like FUF, I can use this raw request as a template, okay? So I can right click on it and then I can click on save selected text to file. So now I will name it I will place it on the temp directory and I will name it, if only my keyboard was working. Okay, so I will name it login user rec. Okay, now let's save it. And now if I inspect it, we see it here, right? So what I will do now is, because I will use FOF to perform a quick brute force, I will place FOF marker, which is fuss, okay? And I will have the password value fixed. I will set it to invalid. And I also see that there's a cookie being sent, but okay. So now with FUF, what I will do is I will specify the word list that I had already identified, and I want to set the request to login user rec, okay? And the request protocol is HTTP. And because the data is being sent encoded, I want to also set the encoded to URL encode, and I want to match all status code. And this is where the message that we got here becomes useful because this is our baseline. So I can grab this invalid user or password and use it to filter out. Okay. So now I don't have any hit. Are we done? Quick question for you in the chat. Are we done with our test? If we want to test if the username or the password is vulnerable. So I see Julian in the chat asking why not burps it to intruder. And I also see a very good response that it might be throttle because we have the community edition, right? So no, we are not done with the test. And although I see Sorin mentioning SQLi injections, what we are actually missing, we don't want to only test the username field. We also want to test the password field because this is also controllable by us, right? So what I will do is that I will quickly copy the login request for the user and I will name it login pass. And then I will change, okay, I will change the marker from the username, and then I will set this one to invalid and set password to fuzz. Okay, so now I can run the command again, but I need to change the request, right? Login pass. Let's send it. No request, right? So Muhammad, I see on the chat you ask why invalid. Why I'm using invalid? I suppose you mean for this string here is because that's our baseline. Okay. So now neither of these passes produced a response that I would like to investigate further. I will add it to my notes, however, at least one of them. Okay. So now let's see, when we were testing the login form, let's see what our scans identified. Okay. So, okay, so we knew about the login.php already. We knew about DS store already. But I now notice a home.php. And what's happening with this home.php? It's been redirected to login.php. Again, why? Why are we facing another redirect? So I want to investigate this further, okay? But I also want to add the discovery to my notes for reporting purposes, right? And it's the home. I want to highlight this quickly. So 29. So this is the discovery that caught my attention, right? I think I have a character. One moment, please. Something is wrong with my code block here. Okay, 29, right? Oh, now never mind. But this is the correct one, right? That caught my attention. So let's check this on Burp's browser and let's navigate to. Well, first let me stop the interceptor and let me send this request here to home. You saw that, right? Home gets me redirected to login. So let's see in Burp why, like what's going on here, right? So I see the home request here. So what should we pay close attention now? Let me send it to repeater. Okay, let me send it to repeater. Send it, and I get the. Uh, I'm not sure why I didn't get the header again this time, but let's add it. Forwarded for. Then add it manually. We can troubleshoot it later. Okay, so not so a redirect, right? Now, what do we see here? Let's render it. Look, manage employees. So on the repeater, we can see it render, right? So what's a very important finding that we have here? The server, it's returning a protected employee to our own authenticated request, and then tells the browser, if we see the raw request again, to remember that we researched this header, right? So it tells the browser, I guess on the backend, it's detecting that we are not authenticated, and is therefore trying to have us authenticate, right? So I cannot determine right now like the exact reason why this is happening because I don't have the source code, and we are doing a black box testing, but we have demonstrated enough, right, that we can have new content now, right? So while repeater lets us inspect this content, I will still like to use the browser because I see here that there are some fields that are interactive or that we might be able to submit data on. Okay, so I also see some pagination controls. It looks, but I cannot click them right now, right? So I think that we could put in practice again what we have learned, the context that we learned here from Burp's documentation. And what if we went to Burp settings, proxy, and on the match and replace rule, let's see what other options we have. So we see that we could actually set a response header, because if once again we see the response itself, the response header is where we are being told where to redirect. So let me go to burp settings, then on uh, add. So I want a response header. Now I want that whenever or wherever there is a location login.php, I want it to be removed. Okay, so let's test this here. Like, let's set the header login. Now I want to set another one that does not match my rule to confirm that it's actually working. If I did like location b2 and I test it, so I see that location b2 is part of the response headers, but the header that is redirecting me is not. So the rule is working, right? So now let's add this rule. Okay, let me confirm I have it correctly. Location, yep, no regex needed. Okay, now let me close the settings. Now what happens if in the browser we test directly for home? You see, we have now also removed the header that was forwarding our traffic to a login endpoint because we were not authenticated. So right here, this response modification or this response header modification is not really authenticating us anywhere, right? And it's not really either disclosing new content. This content was already on the redirect, right? It was already present on the original response. So by us removing the header, we only change what the browser was doing after receiving the response. Okay. So now I see this manage employee site. And now that we can keep ourselves on home.php, let's quickly map what the application allows us to do before we choose where to test, right? So it looks like we are able to do some testing, like if we did Edwin, or if we use the already existing employee name, then we get the results. We have a search functionality here, right? Now, it seems like we also get some actions like updating a record, okay, and deleting, looks like, right? So if we were to update, okay, I don't want to do that right now. So just, oh, and the pagination page that I see here, the pagination functionality, it's working, right? Okay, so just in this minute or so, I have identified multiple vectors that we could test, right? So we have so many options now. What if this was your exam machine? Which one will you start testing? Because let's keep in mind that on the exam we don't have unlimited time. Also, if you were doing a real time or a real life engagement, the time is a scope. You do not have unlimited time there either. So which feature will you say that is a combination that has like low risk, because editing data records on a client's database, I don't think that's a good idea. Now, on the lab, of course, you can revert the machines whenever you want if there's something, if something goes wrong, right? But I will not treat this as the top priority now. What I will say that the searching functionality is our best starting point right now. Okay, because it accepts user control text and also displays what looks to be database backed records. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to start with a baseline. Okay, and here you may see a lot of like records, but this is from many other labs that I have been working on. So yeah, that's why you see this field in here. So I want to start with a baseline. For example, if I did offset one of the um, options I see here, so let's search for it, and we see a number of employees, 0, right? I see on the chat, Soreen asked me if I can retrace the response part because some people missed it. Yeah, so what allowed us to now access this protected resource is because we noticed on this that we noticed that home was redirecting us to login.php, right? So I wanted to see why was this happening, and the hypothesis that I came up with was that the web server at some point was identifying that I was not authenticated and wanted me to authenticate. So it sent me to login.php. But I ask you, like, how is the server sending me back to login.php? And we came back to the header that we had identified before, which is location login.php, right? So if we remove this one, we took or and we practiced the knowledge that we had already acquired, right? So we came to proxy settings, match and replace rules, and we added another rule in which whenever there was a response header containing the login.php, then it will be removed. And upon removing this header, we were able to access this protected site. Okay? So I know that I really went fast on this one right now, but I hope that this now like makes a bit more sense, right? Great, great, great. So I was now trying to set up a base query, right? And I'm now using offset because I know that this value is most likely not going to be on the database, right? So what is the first character? I have seen in the chat a lot of like, hey, test for SQLite, test for SQLite. So we will do that now. Now, what will be like the gold character that you will try to test for an SQLite? Yes, I see already Bart, also Armstrong, and many others to also test for the single quote, right? Now, this is interesting because the application now, it returns number of employees 0, right? So normally on a very, very, very basic lab, this could cause a error, right? Giving away completely that we have an SQL injection in our hands. However, here, the single quote did not produce any visible database error. Now, I want to make emphasis on this. This does not rule out SQL injection because for testing SQL injection, there are so many ways, right? So what could be happening here is that the application may be suppressing the errors, or it could detect this malformed data and just treat it as if it was a malformed condition and say like, okay, no results, right? So that will depend like how this is being handled on the backend. So now, because we cannot rely on an error message, but I still don't want to let go of this possibility, I would like to have a pair of inputs that should produce in the case that we control the query, those tests should produce opposite results if our value is influencing the logic somehow, the query logic. Okay? So, uh, do you have an idea of what pair of tests we could use here that could influence the query, even though the single quote produced no errors? Any ideas? Yeah, exactly. So I see a lot of responses. Thank you guys for being so interactive. I see here Boolean. Um, Bondo, I hope you're pronouncing it okay, is mentioning Boolean, right? So a Boolean test could indeed be an option. So how could I start with right now? So I can start with a true and false end pair, okay? So if I did n 1 equals 1, look, I get the numbers of employees 10. Now, what is the other part of the test? 1 equals 2, because this will never be true. And remember that the AND operator requires both conditions to be true, right? So this one is false, and now we get a number of employees 0. So the response is indeed changing depending on whether our condition is true or false, right? So this is a definite evidence that our input is actually affecting the database query, right? So now, if you notice, however, when we got the true condition, we didn't really get much, right? I could just delete this, and I mean, I'm getting what I lose. See, what I can tell that I lose is the pagination, it seems. Right? I'm getting the same 10, but I'm not really getting any any anything valuable. I mean, I'm getting the exact same 10 records. Should we move on? Right? We should move on, right? Okay, Hikal, I see you said order by and then union, but why would I go for it if I have not yet confirmed that there's a way that there's value in what I'm doing? Because I get the exact same results, the exact same number of employees, right? So here is where it's very important that we look past our queries or past our payloads. We need to understand what they are actually doing. Let's say that we change, for example, if we change the n, let me add some syntax highlighting. So if we change the n, what if we change this for or? Hmm? So as I mentioned, n requires both conditions to be true, right? The original one that is doing the filter and 1 equals 1. However, the or requires one of the conditions to be true, right? So it doesn't matter, at least here, what I sent, but 1 equals 1 will always be true. So this will always match, right? So what I want to do now is I want to first send and swap here for or on the false condition to confirm that I can influence the query. Now, look, I'm sending the false value, but because it's an or, I get 10 employees. So the result still changes, right? What if we did a true value? You see? We no longer have 10 records. We now have 11 because this, right? So just changing the operator allowed me to leak this data. Nice, right? So Now we have confirmed the SQL injection, and with with the payload of or 1 = 1, we now have exposed a hidden row with a normal search filter, right? So we have confirmed the SQLI. Now, with the vulnerability, what can we do? So one of the possible techniques will be error-based SQL injection, right? Will you go for it? It's a question for you. I would like to see some interaction on the chat, please. Would you go with SQL with error-based injection? I see some no's and some yes. So I wouldn't. Why? Let's recall that when I sent the single quote, I did not get any error at all, right? So I cannot, or I should not try for now a payload that depends on the database showing me or the app showing me a error that I'm actually not seeing ever, right? Now, what I would what I would like to test is the union-based SQL injection. Why? Because with the union, if if we have the the SQL injection, and we have the data being returned on the browser, then we could try to use the union keyword to retrieve data from other tables within the database, right? So how can we go about testing the union attacks? Now, we could start, and I have seen this on the chat already quite some minutes ago, that we should start to identify which or how many columns we have, right? Now, a quick test that I could perform just paying attention on what I see here is that I see this table has 4 columns, right? So I might be able to skip some of the steps instead of going order by one, order by two, and so on. I want to test the hypothesis due to this visual effect that the database might have 4 columns. So what I will do now is I will use order by 4, and I do not get an error, right? But I get some results. What if I increase the payload by 1 to 5? So now I got a different response. And let's recall once again that it looks like the database or the application is suppressing the errors. So we are only getting a zero number of employees. Now, quick note, suppressing the error is my hypothesis, right? So now I have a strong lead here to believe that the column has 4 columns, that the database table, sorry, has 4 columns. So what do we need? What do we need now to do? So I want to test which columns are actually displayed, because there might be 4, but not all of them might be shown, right? So what I will do now is I will do a union select, and I will send it with some markers, okay? So I will do union select. I will send it with 101, 102, 202, 203, 303, and 404. Okay, so it looks like the 4 positions are reflected, so we could use them all in theory for our enumeration, right? So now that I see that I could display something, what I would like to identify is the database that it's actually running. So I would like to identify the database engine. Now, there are, and for the due to the time that we have, there are countless amounts of SQL injection cheat sheets. Okay, the course also covers it, so you can go ahead and review it once more if you would like to reinforce the knowledge on it. So what I will try right now, I want to see. Let's do a quick test on Union Select, like 101. I want to test with version, which will work with MS SQL, right? Let's see 303 and then 404. So we get 0. So maybe it's not that MSQL, MS SQL. So let's try with SQLite. So I could try like SQLite version. Look, right? So now we have the results, and look, on the second column, the one I injected, I got 328, 3.28.0. So I have identified that this is an SQLite database, right? In its version, uh, oh no, okay. So 328. Now, if we were going to do some research, like we could go ahead and search for where, let me do just a quick demo, like where SQLite stores its metadata. Um, we will need to review a few resources if we were not aware, right? But this research, due to time, will lead you to knowing that this is actually stored on SQLite master. Okay, SQLite master. Now, I want to try to get the table names from it. So what I will do now is I will use this query, okay, in which I want to get the tables. So let me send it. And now we get class list, employees, qualifications, among others, right? So the one that really caught my attention is the employees table, right? I think that this is the most relevant lead right now. So I'm going to add it as a quick comment, returns employees, okay? So let's see, let's see what we can get from such database, okay? If you would like to replicate, I'm sending it on the chat. So look, let's see. Okay, so from employees, we get how this was created, and now we have identified the column names like first name, last name, password. So I would like to take a look at what's actually stored in here. So what we will do is now using Union, I want to try to show it with to you here, the query I'm running, and I also shared it on the chat. So here, I want to try to get the first name, last name, and the password from employees, right? So let's send it. Look, Jeff Hill's maths is fun. So we have exfiltrated data. And I saw on the chats at the beginning of the session that many of you mentioned that you were able to get the foothold, right? Was this the way in which you got it? Well, you reply, I would like to note or see where I could try these credentials, right? So from our earlier enumeration, we identified, right, that port 22 was open right at the beginning and it's running SSH. So this is now a highly valuable path to test, right? Now, let's see if we can actually get a session because we don't know, right? We might not have SSH access. So we see that is as Jeff. So let's do SSH Jeff SSH Jeff, the IP address, right? And we saw the password was maths is fun. Okay, we got into the machine. So we have our foothold. Nice, right? Now, we're almost done, but I want to mention that unlike a initial foothold, okay, unlike an initial foothold where we might need to test a lot of stuff, for privilege escalation is a bit of a checklist based because there are relatively limited number of attack vectors available. Okay, so my suggestion will be that at first, because we're not really worried about like evasion or not placing files on disk, what I could suggest is that you try to have some automated tools running. Okay, so you could try it, and let me ask you, which tools are your go-tos for such privilege escalation vectors enumeration? Okay, so I see in memoir mentioning WinPiece. Okay, so that's a good option. Yeah, so this time I want to also use WinPiece as I see it mentioned a lot. So WinPiece GitHub. Let me try to get the binary. I will try this one. WinPiece. Where are like the compiled releases? Uh, WinPiece x64, this one. So I will download it. And another one that I want to test that I see Kate mentioning on the chat is previous check, right? So let's go with previous check GitHub. And I have here the repo. I will, if you would like to download it yourself. Okay, so I have here the repo and I want to get the script. Okay. Okay, so I have downloaded WinPiece and previous check. Okay, so let me from the other terminal, I want to move move them from the downloads WinPiece to here, and I want to move the downloads previous here. Okay, so I have them now here. Now, what will be a very efficient way for us to transfer over these files to the host? So because we have SSH, we could use the SCP tool, okay, to transferring them over. And where will you place them? This time, I want to place them on the downloads directory of Jeff because it's likely, or most more than likely, that it will have write access on it, right? So let me, so this should help you see it better. Okay, so what I will do is use SCP. I want to transfer previous check, WinPiece, and I want to transfer it over to the host, okay? And to the C users, Jeff downloads. I think it's good. Yeah. So maths is fun. 1, 2, 3. Okay, they were transferred over, right? So okay, so if we inspect now the downloads directory, we have them there on file, right? So we can launch now. We can launch these ones. Previous check. I will do it in the background, and I also want to save its output to a text file. So what I will do is start. Okay, I want to send it in the background, and due to time, I will share it here. Have it on my notes. That's the one that I'm running. Okay. So I'm now running invoke previous check, and I'm also interested on running Wimpy's. Okay. Let's start Wimpy's. I am also running it on the background, and I want its output to be redirected to a txt file that I can later inspect if needed. So should we stop here and wait for the automated tools to finish and rely only on their output? Or should we do something else? I want to read you guys on the chat, please. Would you start just checking the progress bar going indefinitely for now? Exactly. I see he called mentions we should do some manual enumeration. So let's do it. We have confirmed, of course, the user that we had got was Jeff, right? Now, I want to also see the host name, robust, okay? Now, which privileges might we could we have? If we do who am I all, I see that we are part of the users, but of course, right? But we are not part of any privileged user group as far as I can tell. And I also don't see any privilege that stands out for me. Okay, let's do net user Jeff. Yeah, nothing really stands out. So what can we try now? Because of course I cannot remember every single vector that I can test, right? At least for me that's not possible. So while we could try some other tools or some other manual enumeration, there are some very interesting resources. One of them, let me get it here. So we have some resources like Hacktricks that document a lot of the vectors that we could test. Now, if I take a quick glance at everything, like we could go for PowerShell history, transcript files, right? Let's see, drives. I saw some of you mentioning shares, but let's see. So I'm just trying to see what, what I could test now while those tools run. Okay, users and groups. We saw our user, and we saw it was not part of a administrator group, for example. Services. So there are a lot, right? There are a lot of checks we could take. Now, one of the vectors that I think you should always keep in mind are the sticky notes, okay? Because it already tells us that people often use the sticky notes app on Windows workstations to save passwords and other information, not realizing it is a database file. I see Memoir mentioning on the chat guilty of saving the passwords on sticky notes. So it says that they should be located on this directory, right? Of course, we need to adapt this to our user. So let me quickly change it to Jeff. I want to first see if the file actually exists, Jeff. So let's confirm it. There, copy paste it, sharing it here in the chat. So it does, right? Now, I could go many ways about this, but I want to take a quick look with a type and see if, even though the data might be a bit disorganized, we might get a few low-hanging fruits strings in there, right? So because I have that progress bar at the top, I want to take this output to my node so I can analyze it closer without the progress bar interfering, right? So let's see. Let's take a quick look here. Okay. Nothing really stands out for me now. Oh, look. Administrator, my super secure password 2212. What does this look like? So many of you miss this vector, right? So what could we do now? We could test them with SSH again, right? So let me get another terminal. And now I want to SSH as administrator, right? So what I will do is SSH administrator at, get the IP once more. And once it asks for the password, hopefully it still works. You see? Who am I? Administrator. It wasn't really that hard of how to get, so the hard part was not getting those credentials. It was actually knowing what to look for, right? And that's it. That's the entire machine. I hope that you guys have liked the session. It's been a long one, but I really hope you have enjoyed it and learned a lot with us. So if you had any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. We will gladly take a look at them now. I see that Brox is asking, did Wimpy's also find the sticky note? So it will depend on if it's part of its checks, right? So we could take a look at the log that we wrote. Let me see. So we wrote it on. I think I will get back to Jeff's session. Yeah. So dear downloads. So CD downloads. Type Wimpy's. So we could start like checking if it eventually got it right. Honestly, on the top of my head, I don't recall if it's one of the checks that it performs. But if it is, it will most likely have found it. Yeah. I see Mohammed asking what was the admin password again. So I got it from the sticky notes here, right? This one that I got this route from Hacktricks. Once again, I'll share the link here. And the password itself was, it was my super secure password 21112. Now, please don't get just an a. I see that do not get an SSH session right just to crowd the flag with the credentials I've just shared. Okay, please. Oh, I love to see how interactive you've been on the chat. I'm having to try to read all of them. By the way, Salar has shared in the chat the survey link. We would really appreciate if you could please fill it out because that helps us um, get your thoughts on these sessions if you find them valuable, and also what else you would like to see, right? I see a very nice question here. I mean, all of them are very nice, but I see Adam asking, were all of today's tools usable on the exam? So, as long, and this is shown on the OACP exam guide, so as long as the tool is used for enumeration, so you can see here that tools that perform automatic exploitation, they are not allowed. You cannot use them. But if you're using for enumeration, then I don't see a problem, but maybe you could reach out to challenges at offset.com directly. Okay, so yes. So again, it has been a huge pleasure, guys, to be with you during this session and all the others that I have conducted. And again, we hope that you are finding a lot of value in the hack track sessions. So if there are no any other questions, again, very happy to have been here with you. So thank you guys.
Recording stopped.